The purchasing process when buying a home. This video is designed to be the third video in a series of videos typically aimed at first home buyers. However, the process of purchasing a home really applies for anyone. If you are a first home buyer and you haven't looked at those other videos, I suggest at the end of this video you go back and look through, because obviously you need to have the deposit and the borrowing power to be able to go ahead and purchase a property. So if you're not across that yet, feel free to jump into that. Let's get into purchasing power. Now, I could probably talk about purchasing power for a few hours. The intention in this video is just to simplify it a little bit, because for most people, you're not buying a home. Quite likely you're only going to buy a home once or twice throughout your life. So the idea is to dumb it down a little bit, if I want to be frank, just so you've got a bit of an idea. So I'm going to simplify this into 4 steps. Your first step is the pre-approval or the finance sorted. What I mean by that is, in terms of pre-approval, usually that's you've come to someone like me, mortgage broker, you've gone through all the ins and outs to see if you can get this done, in terms of you're going to get the loan approved and you're going to be able to purchase the property. In certain cases, the actual pre-approval isn't needed. It just depends on the strength of the client and how thorough the mortgage broker has been in assessing that client. So for example, with my clients, I'm going over all the documents that the lender's going to look at. So I'm going over credit file, bank statements, income documents, anything else that a bank's going to need to say yes or no. A good broker in my mind is always going to look at contingencies. Okay, if kind of whatever happens and this lender says no, am I going to be sure there's a backup plan there? Because sometimes the backup plan needs to be there, especially if the purchase is unconditional, you've bought it at auction, for example, there needs to be a backup plan. So I'm going to get into unconditionals, conditionals, auctions, all that sort of stuff later on in this video. Step number 1 is very basic. Organize your finance first. Step number 2 is your research. So sometimes this can happen prior to you doing the finance or after you doing the finance, or at the same time. The research is super duper important, especially in a market where there's more demand than supply, which unfortunately we're living in Australia, and it looks like there's going to be more demand than supply going forward in a lot of areas. It's very important to do your research. Quite often what I find is people haven't done their research, and what's exciting at the start, going out, getting your coffee, going from house to house every Saturday, trying to find that dream home, actually ends up in a lot of frustration, stress, and people just being tired of the process because they don't know what something's worth. They're listening to other people. They're looking at the prices online. Oh, it sold above the price range. It's not our fault. I get that it's not your fault, but I'm here to tell you, you can put that back in your control. And there's going to be a couple of things which I'm going to say about that now. The research is important. So number 1, figure out where you want to buy and what you want to buy. Quite often what I find is people going, oh, we're an open canvas. We could buy here, 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 here. The problem with that is you have a limited idea of what something's worth and what a suburb is like if you're trying to buy in different sorts of areas. It can be complex just within one suburb trying to buy it. How do you know if you're buying on the right side of the tracks? How do you know if you're buying in a school zone? How do you know if this development or if this pocket is better than the other pockets? And the problem is, if you spread yourself too thin, researching all these different places, there are things that you could miss, important things that you could miss. And that'll vary on the type of property as well. Oh, I want to buy a townhouse. I want to buy, versus I want to buy a 3-bedder on 600 square meters. The type of property you want to narrow down, and that's part of your research. Once you've done that, that allows you to figure out what something's worth, because I've just said what the property is advertised for is generally not what it sells for. And this is a constant source of frustration for buyers that I chat to buyers with every week. And there's a really basic thing you can do, and that is use the sold tab on your Real Estate Australia app or your Domain app. So if you're looking for a 3-bedroom house in Frankston that's sold within the last 6 months, you can basically look at everything there and what it's sold for in the last 6 months. You can see those listings. You can use the map function so you can see what part of that suburb it's been sold in. And that is a really good read on what something's worth, because you're going to see something on the market and you're going going to go, okay, that's similar to these other properties that have sold on the market. It's got 750 as the maximum price range. Honestly, it's probably 820 to 850 in what it's going to go for. And that's really important because obviously if your budget is 760 and you're going to think, oh, I'm going to go, and even if it goes a little bit over, I've got the wiggle room, you're going to get your expectations smashed when that property goes for 820 or 850. So that research can really help you be prepared and save you from all that time, stress and frustration, especially if you're in a situation where, you know, the lease is running out and you need to be in the new home within a particular time frame. Know what you want, know what something's worth. The third thing, which comes to the types of contracts, I guess you could say, is conditional versus unconditional. You can buy a property with conditions. So really there could be any conditions. There's two main conditions, which is designed to protect you, the buyer. Condition number one is finance clause. So the bank haven't approved this loan. They've pre-approved it, remember. For the bank to approve it, they need to see a contract that you've signed because they want to make sure the contract's fine, and then they want to value the property. They want to make sure that you've paid market price for it, so you haven't paid, you know, crazy overs for it or anything like that. And the value is going to leave any notes on, you know, it doesn't look structurally sound. Once I had this property where there was a big crack through the wall and the valuer left comments on it, and it killed the deal. But the client was able to back out on that deal because they had a finance clause in place. Speaking of building defects, the other major clause is a building and pest inspection. Some people try to do this and they go, oh, I've got my mate who's a builder or whatever. That doesn't get you out of the clause. You need the clause there to protect you. And I've seen this happen time and time again. I've seen some dodgy things happen where the client would never have seen this, would never have understood that this whole thing's been renoed, but there's been no actual plumbing under the building. They just floored it over. So kitchen and shower just run into the ground below it. Yes, that's right. That probably would have been, I don't know, 70 or 80 grand minimum worth of stuff to fix in the building with that particular purchase. You just don't know. So having that building and pest inspection there is put in place to protect you. In terms of unconditionals are quite common. Traditionally, auctions, at least here in Victoria, are generally unconditional. So that's the reason why auctions are very popular, because vendors want to sell it, because there's less likelihood. They want to get the maximum purchase price, don't get me wrong, but there's less likelihood the buyer will back out of that purchase. Obviously, for the buyer, for you, the unconditional is more risky because you need the finance to go through. So you need to be having a dialogue with your mortgage broker or whoever's doing the finance to make sure that they're really confident that the loan's going to be fine. That's why I always talk about contingencies. Sometimes, however, unconditional isn't an option. If it's a really hot market, quite often the seller will take a bidder, and they don't have to be the highest bidder. I've seen this plenty of times where, say for example, the purchaser, you've bid 800, someone else has come in, you've bid 800 with a finance clause and a building and pest clause, say for example, and there's been a buyer come in at 785, that's unconditional. I've seen plenty of times where the seller wants the certainty of that unconditional contract and they'll take the lower price. So quite often that can't be helped. Some people, I would say, no, I would recommend that you have those conditions in because they protect you. That can be a disadvantage if you've got unconditional buyers or it's a market where there's auctions as well. That's why it's important to consult with your mortgage broker. But understanding those two will allow you to move forward, to buy something. The only thing I'll say about that is I've tried to dumb it down, but it can be a complex process. Remember, you're dealing with real estate agents and they're representing the seller. They're not representing you. So whatever information that you're getting told, sometimes it's in the best interest of the seller and not the buyer, which is you. If this is above your head, you can use your own agent. You can appoint your own expert to represent you. That's usually called a buyer agent or a buyer advocate. Depending on who they are, they will offer you different services. But in essence, they're helping you buy a property. So when it's a hot market, they can help you. They can identify stuff that actually isn't getting sold through realestate.com.au. Off the market purchases, they can help you source those sorts of properties. The last part of the process is once you've bought something, you need to get that loan approved. So your broker will go get the contract, get the valuation done, assuming there's no issues there. Loan will get approved. Loan contracts will come out from the bank. You complete them. And then it's up to your conveyancer to tee up the settlement, which is basically if there's funds required for you to pay at settlement, you'll know about that, and that will be organized so that it's smooth and it happens all on the day. They will tee up the rest of whatever needs to happen with the settlement, so stamp duty payments, all of that sort of stuff. It's all done, it's all computerized these days. It's done on a system. Usually that's a smooth process now. Back in the day, it was done, old school with paper and bank checks, which led to kind of some stressful situations and some things happening late. Usually everything goes through smooth these days and you've purchased the property. So there it is. I hope I've kind of made that as simple as possible. If you've got any questions, please chuck them in the comments below. Based on my 14 years of experience running this business, is that there are a lot of other things that can come up. So feel free to ask your questions. If you want a conversation of a more private nature, my links are below. You can have a chat with me directly if you like. If you like this video, subscribe. We'll catch you later. Bye.